The sun beat down on the desolate landscape, baking the sand to a shimmering haze. This was Zara's world, a world of dust, danger, and secrets buried deeper than the ancient ruins scattered across the desert. She was a journalist, not just any journalist, but one with a fire in her heart and an unyielding commitment to truth. For months, Zara had been risking her life, piecing together fragments of information. Whispers in crowded marketplaces, hushed conversations in dimly lit tents, all pointed to one man, Omar Khalil. He was a warlord, a tyrant who ruled this region with an iron fist. But Zara knew there was more to his reign than just brute force. She suspected Khalil was involved in something far more sinister, something that reached beyond the borders of this forgotten land. Her investigation led her down a dangerous path, uncovering evidence of smuggling operations, exploitation of the local population, and, most disturbingly, the manipulation of vital water resources, leaving villages parched and desperate. Each piece of evidence she gathered was a spark, threatening to ignite a firestorm that could topple Khalil's empire. But with every step closer to the truth, Zara knew she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move could send her plummeting into the abyss. And Khalil was a patient predator, waiting for her to slip. Khalil's power wasn't just about guns and soldiers. It was about control. He controlled the narrative, painting himself as a protector, a provider. But Zara saw through the facade. She saw the suffering he caused, the families he destroyed, and the resources he hoarded for his own gain. The evidence she gathered was damning. Smuggled goods flowing through secret desert routes, enriching Khalil while the people starved. Forced labor in the mines, men and women toiling under the scorching sun for a pittance. But the water, that was the cruelest cut of all. Khalil controlled the wells, charging exorbitant prices, leaving villages with nothing. Children cried from thirst, crops withered, and the desert, already harsh, became a tomb. Zara knew she had to expose him. She compiled her findings into a detailed report, a digital bomb ready to detonate. But getting it out of the region was a challenge. Khalil's eyes and ears were everywhere. Every phone line was monitored, every internet cafe watched. She needed a way to bypass his surveillance, a way to reach the outside world and reveal the truth before Khalil silenced her forever. The clock was ticking, and the desert wind carried whispers of Khalil's growing impatience. He knew someone was digging into his affairs, and he wouldn't rest until they were silenced. Zara had an old contact, a sympathetic tech expert working at a small, overlooked radio station on the edge of Khalil's territory. It was a long shot, but it was her only option. Under the cover of a raging sandstorm, she made her way to the station, a rickety building battered by the elements. The tech expert, a nervous man named Omar, an unfortunate coincidence, agreed to help. He rigged up a satellite connection, bypassing Khalil's network. With trembling hands, Zara uploaded her report. The data flowed, a digital torrent carrying the weight of truth across continents. Within hours, the report went viral. News outlets around the world picked up the story, exposing Khalil's crimes to a global audience. The international community erupted in outrage. Sanctions were threatened, investigations were launched, and Khalil's carefully constructed image crumbled. But the victory was short-lived. Khalil, enraged by the betrayal, unleashed his fury. He ordered a complete lockdown of the region, hunting for the source of the leak. Zara knew she was in grave danger. She had become a marked woman, her name whispered with venom in the desert wind. Khalil would stop at nothing to silence her, and his reach was long and merciless. She had to disappear, to find a safe haven before Khalil's men closed in. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a quiet corner of London, Rick, a man etched with the scars of past battles, monitored the news. He was no stranger to the conflicts of the Middle East. He'd spent years there as a special forces operative. He'd seen firsthand the corruption and suffering that warlords like Khalil inflicted. Rick had tried to leave that life behind, seeking solace in anonymity. But some battles he knew couldn't be ignored. He recognized the region in the news reports, the same parched land he once fought to protect. He saw Zara's name and the details of her investigation. Something about her story resonated with him, a sense of duty, a flicker of the man he used to be. He received a call from an old acquaintance at a humanitarian aid organization. They were desperate to get Zara out of Khalil's clutches. They knew Rick's skills and his familiarity with the region made him the best, perhaps the only hope for her survival. The man on the phone detailed the situation. Zara was trapped, Khalil's forces were closing in, and time was running out. Rick listened, his gaze hardening. He knew what he had to do. The quiet life could wait. Rick didn't hesitate. He packed a bag, a carefully curated collection of tools and weapons honed by years of experience. Each item had a purpose, each a testament to his past life. He contacted a few old contacts, pulling in favors, arranging transportation. He moved with a quiet efficiency, the ghost of the soldier reawakening within him. He knew Khalil's fortress. It was a sprawling complex carved into the sandstone cliffs, a natural stronghold fortified with modern weaponry. It was designed to be impenetrable, a symbol of Khalil's power. But Rick had faced worse odds before. He knew the terrain, he understood the enemy, and he had a skill set that few could match. His moral compass, though tested by the horrors he had witnessed, still pointed true. He couldn't stand by and watch as Zara was silenced. He believed in justice, in the power of truth, and in the importance of protecting the innocent. This wasn't just a mission, it was a personal crusade. He was going to tear down Khalil's fortress brick by brick if that's what it took to get Zara out alive. The desert was waiting, and Rick was ready. The NGO contact provided Rick with satellite images of the fortress, intel on Khalil's security protocols, and Zara's last known location. The information painted a grim picture. The fortress was a maze of tunnels and courtyards, patrolled by heavily armed guards, and surrounded by multiple layers of defenses. Khalil wasn't taking any chances. Rick studied the images, his mind dissecting the fortress's vulnerabilities. The main gate was heavily fortified, but the western wall, overlooking a treacherous ravine, appeared less guarded. The desert itself was a formidable obstacle, with scorching heat, unpredictable sandstorms, and limited access to water. He planned his route meticulously, factoring in the terrain, the weather, and the enemy's capabilities. He would need to move fast and silently, relying on his training and instincts to overcome the odds. The NGO had arranged for a local guide, a Bedouin nomad named Omar, another Omar, who knew the desert like the back of his hand. Omar would lead him to a hidden approach point, minimizing the risk of detection. Rick knew this was a suicide mission, but he was prepared to risk everything to save Zara. She was a symbol of hope in a land consumed by darkness, and he wouldn't let her light be extinguished. After days of relentless travel, guided by the enigmatic Omar, Rick finally saw it, Khalil's fortress, a jagged scar on the horizon. It loomed against the setting sun, a monument to greed and oppression. The air crackled with tension. Rick used his binoculars to survey the surroundings. Armored vehicles patrolled the perimeter, their gun turrets scanning the landscape. Guards manned watchtowers, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. The desert itself was a weapon, the swirling sandstorms providing cover for the enemy and obscuring Rick's movements. He noticed a pattern in the guards' patrols, a momentary lapse in security near the ravine. That was his opening. He briefed Omar on the plan. They would approach the fortress under the cover of darkness, using the ravine as concealment. Rick would then scale the western wall, taking out the guards silently before making his way inside. The sandstorm intensified, whipping around them like a furious beast. It was a dangerous gamble, but Rick knew they had to move now. The storm would provide cover, but it could also disorient them, leading them astray. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. The fortress awaited, and the clock was ticking. Zara's life depended on his success. The sandstorm roared, a deafening symphony of wind and sand. Rick and Omar moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the storm. They reached the ravine, its jagged rocks offering precarious footing. Rick scaled the wall with practiced ease, his movements fluid and silent. The first guard was positioned on a small platform overlooking the ravine. Rick neutralized him swiftly and silently, a single strike to the neck rendering him unconscious. He secured the guard's weapon and moved on. The second guard was patrolling along the wall. Rick waited for him to pass, then dropped down behind him, taking him out with a chokehold. He continued his ascent, eliminating the outer perimeter guards one by one. Each takedown was precise and efficient, a testament to his years of training. He used the environment to his advantage, the shadows and the storm providing cover. He was a ghost, unseen and unheard. With the outer perimeter secured, Rick signaled to Omar, who remained hidden in the ravine. It was time to move inside. The real challenge was about to begin. The fortress was a labyrinth, and Khalil's forces were waiting. But Rick was ready. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he wouldn't rest until Zara was safe. Inside the fortress, Zara was running out of time. Khalil's men were closing in, their footsteps echoing through the corridors. She had managed to find a hidden communications device, a relic from a previous uprising. It was her last chance to contact the outside world, to let them know she was still alive. She knew Rick was coming. The NGO had managed to get a message to her, confirming his arrival. She needed to give him her location, but she couldn't risk using a direct transmission. Khalil's men were monitoring all frequencies. Using a prearranged code, she began transmitting a series of seemingly random numbers and letters, embedding her location within the noise. But the signal was weak, and the interference from the sandstorm made it even harder to send. Just as she was about to transmit the final sequence, the door burst open. Khalil's men stormed into the room, their weapons raised. Zara quickly shut down the device, hiding it beneath a loose floorboard. She knew she had been discovered. Her heart pounded in her chest as the guards dragged her away, deeper into the heart of the fortress. Her only hope now rested on Rick, and she prayed he would arrive in time. Rick knew Zara's time was running out. He had to act fast. Abandoning his stealth approach, he decided to create a diversion, a bold move that would draw Khalil's forces away from Zara's location. He contacted Omar via radio. "Get ready to move," he said, his voice grim. Using explosives salvaged from the outer perimeter guards, Rick rigged a charge to the main gate. The explosion rocked the fortress, tearing a gaping hole in the reinforced steel. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted as guards scrambled to respond. Rick seized the opportunity, commandeering a heavily armored jeep parked nearby. He roared through the shattered gate, triggering a wild chase across the desert. Khalil's men pursued him in a convoy of vehicles, their machine guns blazing. Rick, a master driver, navigated the treacherous terrain with skill and precision. He weaved through sand dunes, dodged rocky outcrops, and used the jeep's armor to withstand the barrage of bullets. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever, but he needed to buy Zara time to create an opening for her escape. He slammed the jeep into a sharp turn, sending one of the pursuing vehicles careening into a sand dune. The chase was on, a desperate race against time and overwhelming odds. The vehicle chase was a success, drawing most of Khalil's forces away from the fortress. Rick, knowing he had bought Zara some time, abandoned the jeep, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress. He was now in his element, a one-man wrecking crew against an army of armed guards. The fighting was brutal and relentless. Rick moved with speed and precision, using his martial arts skills to disarm and incapacitate his opponents. He dodged bullets, deflected blows, and delivered devastating counterattacks. Each fight was a carefully choreographed dance of destruction, showcasing Statham's signature action style. He fought his way through the barracks, the armory, and the command center, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in his wake. The guards were well trained, but they were no match for Rick's experience and determination. He used his surroundings to his advantage, turning tables, chairs, and even pipes into weapons. With each fight, the enemies became tougher, more determined. Khalil had unleashed his elite guards, hardened veterans who were fiercely loyal to him. But Rick pressed on, fueled by his unwavering commitment to saving Zara. He was a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting. The fortress trembled with every blow, every gunshot, every bone-crunching impact. As Rick fought, a series of images flashed through his mind, fragments of a past he had tried to bury. He saw himself younger and more idealistic as part of a peacekeeping force in the region. He remembered the faces of the local people, their hope and their resilience despite the hardships they faced. He recalled a specific incident, a village raided by bandits, their water supply destroyed. He and his team had arrived too late to save everyone, but they had managed to rescue a young girl named Aisha. He had carried her to safety, her small hand gripping his tightly. Aisha had reminded him of his own daughter back home. He had vowed to protect her, to ensure she had a future. But the region was chaotic, and promises were hard to keep. Aisha had later died in a crossfire, a casualty of the endless conflict. Rick blamed himself for her death. He had failed to protect her, failed to make a difference. That guilt had haunted him ever since, driving him to leave the special forces and seek a life of quiet solitude. But Zara's situation had stirred something within him, a chance to atone for his past failures. He saw Aisha in Zara, a brave and determined woman fighting for justice in a land consumed by darkness. He couldn't let her suffer the same fate. He had to save her, not just for her sake, but for Aisha's as well. Following Zara's trail, Rick finally reached her. She was being held in a dimly lit cell, guarded by two of Khalil's most imposing soldiers. Rick quickly dispatched the guards, freeing Zara from her confinement. "We have to go," Rick said, his voice urgent. "They know we're here." Zara, though shaken, was resolute. "I'm ready," she replied, her eyes filled with determination. They made their way through the fortress, navigating the maze of corridors, trying to find an escape route. But Khalil had anticipated their move. As they entered the central courtyard, they were surrounded by Khalil and his elite guards. The courtyard was a wide-open space, offering no cover. They were trapped. Khalil smirked, his eyes filled with contempt. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You are a fool to think you could defeat me." Rick and Zara stood back to back, facing their enemies. The odds were stacked against them, but they refused to surrender. They had come too far to give up now. The final showdown was about to begin. The fate of Zara and perhaps the entire region hung in the balance. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the howling wind. Rick and Zara stood their ground, their eyes fixed on Khalil. He stepped forward, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "You don't understand," Khalil said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I'm not a monster. I'm a protector. I'm doing what's necessary to ensure the survival of my people." He gestured towards the surrounding desert. "This land is harsh, unforgiving. The outside world doesn't care about us. They exploit us, they take our resources, and they leave us to die. I control the water because I have to," he continued. "If I didn't, others would seize it and my people would starve. I smuggle goods because it's the only way to get what we need. I'm not perfect, but I'm doing what I have to do." Zara scoffed. "You're lying," she said, her voice filled with scorn. "You're enriching yourself while your people suffer. You're a thief, a tyrant, and a murderer." Khalil's eyes narrowed. "You believe what you want to believe," he said, "but in the end, I will be remembered as the one who saved his people. You will be forgotten." He raised his hand, signaling his guards. "Kill them." The courtyard erupted in chaos as Khalil's guards opened fire. Rick and Zara dove for cover behind a crumbling stone fountain, bullets ricocheting off the stone. Rick returned fire, his aim precise and deadly. He took down several guards with well-aimed shots, forcing the others to take cover. Zara, though not a trained fighter, proved resourceful. She grabbed a fallen weapon and began firing, providing Rick with cover. They moved from one piece of cover to another, using the environment to their advantage. Rick kicked over a table, creating a makeshift shield. He hurled rocks and debris, disorienting the guards. The gunfight was intense and chaotic. Bullets flew in all directions, the air thick with smoke and dust. Rick engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the guards who got too close, using his martial arts skills to disarm and incapacitate them. He broke ribs, shattered bones, and left a trail of unconscious bodies in his wake. He used the courtyard's architecture to his advantage, leaping over walls, sliding under archways, and using the shadows to conceal his movements. Zara followed his lead, proving to be a quick learner. Together, they fought like a well-oiled machine, a force to be reckoned with. While Rick engaged the guards in a brutal melee, Zara put her knowledge of the fortress to good use. She knew the location of the security control room, a small, heavily guarded chamber overlooking the courtyard. She also knew a secret passage that led directly to it. Using her agility and stealth, she slipped away from the fighting, making her way to the secret passage. She navigated the narrow, winding tunnel, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the control room, taking the guards by surprise. She quickly disabled the security cameras, cutting off Khalil's eyes and ears. She then activated the fortress's internal alarm system, creating further chaos and confusion. The alarms blared, drawing more guards away from the courtyard. She also disabled the electronic locks on several key doors, opening up new escape routes. Zara's actions were a game-changer. She had turned the fortress against itself, giving Rick a crucial advantage. Now it was a race against time. They had to escape before Khalil realized what she had done and regained control. The odds were still stacked against them, but now they had a fighting chance. As Zara created chaos within the fortress, Rick fought his way through the remaining guards, his determination fueled by the knowledge that he was getting closer to Khalil. He finally cornered the Warlord in his private chambers, a lavishly decorated room that stood in stark contrast to the poverty outside. Khalil, stripped of his power and surrounded by the wreckage of his fortress, looked defeated but not broken. He still held a weapon, a gold-plated pistol, a symbol of his wealth and authority. "It's over, Khalil," Rick said, his voice cold and unwavering. "It's time to face justice." "Justice?" Khalil scoffed. "There is no justice in this world, only power." He lunged at Rick, firing the pistol. Rick dodged the bullets, closing the distance between them. The two men engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, a clash of strength, skill, and will. Khalil was a formidable opponent, but Rick was relentless. He used every trick he knew, every move he had learned over years of combat. He punched, kicked, and grappled, pushing Khalil to his limits. The fight was long and grueling, testing Rick's endurance and his resolve. But he refused to give up. He had come too far, sacrificed too much. He had to stop Khalil once and for all. With a final, decisive blow, Rick disarmed Khalil, knocking him to the ground. He stood over the defeated Warlord, his gaze unwavering. But Rick didn't kill him. He knew that killing Khalil wouldn't solve anything. It would only create a power vacuum, leading to more violence and chaos. Instead, he dragged Khalil out into the courtyard, where the remaining guards and followers were gathered. He forced Khalil to confess his crimes, exposing his lies and his corruption. He revealed the truth about the smuggled goods, the forced labor, and the manipulation of the water supply. The effect was immediate. The guards, who had once blindly followed Khalil, began to question their loyalty. They saw the truth in Rick's words, the pain and suffering that Khalil had inflicted on their people. Discontent rippled through the ranks. Some lowered their weapons, their faces filled with shame. Others simply walked away, abandoning Khalil and his crumbling empire. Rick had not only defeated Khalil, but he had also shattered his reputation, exposing him for the tyrant he truly was. He had planted the seeds of doubt in the hearts of his followers, paving the way for a new future, a future free from oppression and corruption. The fortress was now in complete disarray. The alarms were still blaring, the guards were either gone or in a state of confusion, and the foundations of Khalil's empire were crumbling. It was time to leave. As Rick and Zara made their way towards the exit, the fortress began to shake. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and cracks appeared in the walls. It was unclear what was happening. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of the earlier explosions, Or perhaps it was a deliberate act of sabotage by Khalil's disgruntled followers. Or maybe the desert itself was reclaiming what was once stolen. Whatever the cause, the fortress was collapsing. Sections of the walls crumbled, sending debris crashing down. The sandstorm, which had subsided earlier, returned with renewed fury, whipping around them like a vengeful spirit. Rick and Zara ran for their lives, dodging falling rocks and collapsing structures. They reached the outer wall, climbing over the rubble and debris. As they finally escaped the fortress, they turned back to witness its final moments. The entire structure seemed to groan and shudder before collapsing in a cloud of dust and sand. Khalil's reign was over, and his fortress was now nothing more than a pile of ruins. Rick and Zara, battered and bruised but alive, made their way to a prearranged rendezvous point, guided by Omar. They were met by a team from the NGO, who provided them with transportation and medical assistance. They were finally safe. As Zara received treatment for her injuries, she looked at Rick with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." Rick simply nodded, his gaze distant. He knew that the battle was far from over. Khalil's empire had crumbled, but the problems in the region remained. Corruption, exploitation, and violence were still rampant. "I have to go back," Zara said, her eyes filled with determination. "I have to continue my work. The people need me." Rick wasn't surprised. He knew that Zara wouldn't give up. She was a fighter, a beacon of hope in a land of darkness. He admired her courage and her unwavering commitment to justice. "Be careful," Rick said, his voice filled with concern. "It's not over yet." Zara smiled, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I will," she said, "but I won't back down." She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready for the challenge. She had a story to tell, and she wouldn't rest until the truth was revealed. Rick watched as Zara boarded a vehicle, ready to embark on her next mission. He knew that his time in the region was over. He had done what he came to do, and it was time for him to move on. He turned to Omar, his loyal guide, and offered him a grateful smile. "Thank you, my friend," he said. "You were invaluable." Omar nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "It was an honor to fight alongside you," he replied. Rick then turned and walked away, disappearing into the vast expanse of the desert. He knew that he had made a difference, that he had restored some balance to the region. He had helped to expose a tyrant, protect an innocent woman, and pave the way for a brighter future. He still carried the scars of his past, the memories of Aisha, and the guilt of his failures. But he also carried a newfound sense of hope. He had proven to himself that he could still make a difference, that he could still fight for justice. As he walked, he looked up at the sky, the setting sun painting the clouds in vibrant hues of orange and red. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the dry desert air. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was ready for whatever came his way. He was Rick, a force to be reckoned with, and he wouldn't back down from a fight. The end.